3, 2, 1. Welcome and thank you for being with us tonight, October 26th, 2021, for the Emeryville City Council Candidate Forum. My name is Adina Ishii of the League of Women Voters of Berkeley, Albany, Emeryville. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that encourages informed and active participation in government. We do not support or oppose candidates or parties. The advocacy arm of the League may take positions on issues such as ballot measures. However, this forum is presented by the Voter Services and Education arm of the League, which does not take any positions or advocate for them. Yeah. I'd like to remind everyone that the candidates have all agreed to participate under ground rules set for this forum. Candidates are not permitted to display campaign buttons, TV shirts, signs, Zoom backgrounds, etc., in order to maintain neutrality. We are recording tonight's forum and the session will be available on our website, LWVBAE.org, on YouTube and through votersedge.org/CA, with links on our social media accounts at LWVBAE. There are two candidates running for Emeryville City Council. They are Courtney Welch and Charlotte Danielson Chang. On your ballot, you will be able to choose one candidate out of the two. And I want to note that this is a special election. So now let's go over a few ground rules. Each candidate has 2 minutes for opening remarks. The order was determined by drawing lots. I will signal candidates with a countdown, basically from 2 minutes, 15 seconds, 30 seconds, etc. When it will, and then we will tell them to stop. As people signed up via Eventbrite, they could submit written questions. And if you have any additional questions, you may type them in the chat. Those chats go directly to our co-hosts, so they'll be able to pass them on to me, the moderator. All questions will be screened to avoid duplication and personal attacks and focus on issues that are relevant to the city of Emeryville. The order of answering the questions will be alternated and each candidate will have 1.5 minutes to respond to each question. Again, I will signal candidates to let them know when their time is running out. There will be no separate rebuttals. However, the candidates may choose to use some or all of their 1.5 minutes to rebut the responses given by another candidate. Following the questions, each candidate will have 2 minutes for a closing statement and we'll reverse the order from the opening. Now let's begin our candidate forum. First, we have Charlotte Danielson Chang. We'll start with her opening statement and you will have 2 minutes starting now.
Hi, thank you for having me tonight. I'm the mom of 2 Asian American children, one of whom is gay, and I have been fighting with all of my might for the last 25 years to make this world a better place for them. When the City Council majority acted inappropriately towards a 30+ year AAPI resident of Emeryville, I stood up and I spoke out. That's why my opponent has the endorsements, why it didn't matter that she'd only lived in Emeryville for 3 months before running for office, and why the fact that 92% of the over $21,000 she's raised is from PACs and non-Emeryville voters. I knew that this was going to happen because this is how politics works, but I ran anyway because I firmly believe that this is not how democracy works. We have a town full of innovative, creative, caring, and very independent thinking people that get the chance to vote on how this city is run. And why should you vote for me? For one thing, I believe every voice matters, whether you agree with me or not. I also believe in the freedom of local press and the importance of the public and the press holding everyone accountable who's in public office. I have an analytical mind and I'm data-driven. I have a law degree from Stanford and a bachelor's in economics and political science from Berkeley. I have a solid 23-year work history practicing law in the Bay Area. I've been a tech nonprofit CEO and an international innovation ecosystem builder. I'm a small business owner that was raised by small business owners. I'm an diversity, equity, and inclusion community leader and have been for over the last 10 years. And a vote for me also means that you will be putting the first immigrant onto Emeryville City Council ever. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Courtney?
Yes, good evening, everyone. My name is Courtney Welch. I'm an East Bay native. Growing up, I lived in East Oakland and Berkeley, lived in North Oakland and West Oakland as an adult. I've had the honor of working in Emeryville at 2 of our businesses. And now, after a long journey with housing insecurity, I'm proud to call Emeryville home with my 2 boys, Caleb and Cruz. I'm running because I believe investing in my community through public service. And at that moment, this means throwing my hat in the ring to finish out former Councilmember Patz's term. I'll be able to step into that role seamlessly and will be able to govern on day 1. My platform and priorities are in alignment with the concerns of my fellow Emeryville residents: getting more affordable housing in the city, addressing our homelessness crisis, public health emergencies, staying financially solvent as a city, increasing public safety, and improving transit equity. My civic leadership and professional experience, which include being the Director of Policy and Communications at Bay Area Community Land Trust, representing our county district on the Housing and Community Development Advisory Board for the past 3 years, where I'm currently the chair, also on the Commission on the Status of Women. And all of that would allow me to effectively address these issues in our city. And my skills in these areas are complementary to the current city council members' backgrounds. And they agree, because I've been endorsed by the entire city council, along with many of our other local leaders in the area. Additionally, I'm running because my election would provide representation from communities and demographics that are not currently on the city council. There's no Christie Core residents, there are no below market rate renters, and there are no co-parenting parents or Black residents. I want to use this opportunity that, even though it was unplanned, this election, to enhance the strength of our local leadership and our city as a whole, and be a voice for the communities that even in our very progressive city haven't had a voice at the table. Thank you.
Thank you both for your opening statements. I know that you both mentioned priorities that you have, but what will be your main priorities, again, if you've already stated them? And if elected to Emeryville City Council, please expand on what action you would take on one of these issues. And Courtney actually is going first since we're switching. Thank you. And you have 1.5 minutes.
Yes, a big need, of course, as I mentioned, is affordable housing and expanding that affordable housing in our city. We've passed a great ballot measure that has a lot of funding coming down the pipeline. So I want to make sure that we're using those funds to acquire below market rate units that are at risk of possibly turning over, first-time home buyer assistance, foreclosure prevention, rental preservation, and also special needs housing incentives to make sure folks who need permanent supportive care, who are mainly at risk of experiencing homelessness, aren't trapped in a cycle of housing insecurity and also homelessness. Another main piece, of course, is increasing public safety. We don't have a violent crime issue necessarily here in Emeryville, but we do have a property crime issue. And working alongside our law enforcement, me and Chief Jennings, when we spoke, talked about increasing on-beat foot patrols in the known hot spots and throughout the city to stop things like the catalytic converter thefts, auto burglaries and break-ins and thefts, also some of the strong arm robberies we've seen. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Charlotte?
Yeah, I think that the first priority for me before we do anything is to really increase civic engagement and involvement in the city, because I think that's the key actually to solving all of the issues within our city. We have an amazingly highly educated community. We have passionate people. We have a very diverse community base. And this diversity and ingenuity and talent in the city is something that we really need to harness. And right now, you know, until this, we haven't had a real election since 2016. Our boards and commissions do not have Black, Indigenous, people of color on them. As mentioned, our Asian American Pacific Islander community, which is our largest of those groups, is 30% of the community, and it's less than 4% of our boards. And I have done this type of work for over a decade, organizing major events that include grassroots coalitions with everything from South Asian, Sikh, Muslim, Black, Indigenous, LGBTQ plus Latinx, et cetera, communities of thousands and thousands of voters registering to vote in candidate halls, voter education forums, and internships and initiatives to get them to shatter the glass ceiling. So, and I've spoken with, over the course of this election, done a very grassroots campaign and talked to so many people who know how to solve our climate change issues and every other issue we have going on in the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is about climate change. Currently, we're in a climate crisis that will greatly impact Emeryville. What policies will you focus on to combat this crisis if elected? And this question starts with you, Charlotte.
Well, right now, our city is not actually doing enough on this issue. It is a climate emergency. We've seen everything from the UN to organizations that have pointed out how far behind we are. I have the advantage of having worked internationally and led technology and innovation organization that connected the Nordic region with the United States. And they are world leaders in sustainability. So all of the things that Emeryville is trying to do, there are cities that have already done this. And I feel like it's very frustrating to look around the city and see that we just keep trying to reinvent the wheel, and we're wasting taxpayer money doing that. We really can talk to and look at examples where cities have already maintained and managed to create bike and pedestrian paths that work for a community to actually use it as alternative transportation. We have Stockholm, Sweden, for example, has the highest number of eco hotels in the world. I have connections to all of those regions. I've been working in them for the last 20 years with connecting them to the US. California understands the importance of this and has created memorandums of understanding with the Nordic countries on sustainability issues. And we could bring that knowledge here locally and those connections, everything from innovative startups who have simple, cheap little fixes that can do these things to collaborations with cities. Thank you.
Courtney?
Yeah, you know, I definitely agree. We need to do more on reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. Our climate plan that was enacted in 2016, we're still in the middle of it, but we can do more, which is why I was happy to see that Emeryville actually has an active transportation plan that is actually going on right now for the next year. We are actually asking our residents to be a part of crafting this new plan that at the end of 2022 would be presented to the City Council. And it's interactive. People are encouraged to go online, take photos, and also list where they can see the improvements, because the desire is, of course, is that we get off of the dependency on cars. We're obviously right next to a major highway. We've got folks coming in to work in Emeryville, 3 times the amount of people who are actually here. That's a lot of traffic coming in and out of our city. So once the prioritized project is completed, we'll have recommendations on improving routes for people to walk and bike and roll, whatever wheels you're using. Also fixing the areas that make it challenging to do so, because that's really the issue, is that there's a lot of limitations, and also making walking, biking easier and safer for everyone of all ages and abilities.
Thank you both. I want to remind folks in the audience that you can submit your questions through the chat, and we will have them sorted and then given to me. My next question is about public safety. Emeryville was recently listed as America's #1 most dangerous small town. What do you think about this finding? And do you think that something should be done to address safety concerns? And Courtney, you are up first.
You know, the details are in the data on that one. It's really around the retail theft and the auto burglaries, a lot of which, unfortunately, our visitors and employees, people who are coming here to work, experience, which is definitely a concern of mine. Of course, we do not want to live in a place where property crime, even though it's not, you know, violent crime, people aren't getting shot on the street, even though it's still terrible, and it still deters people from wanting to come to Emeryville, live in Emeryville, and of course have businesses in Emeryville. again, talking with Chief Jennings, wanting to increase those on-beat foot patrols. They did a study in Philadelphia. They were actually trying to target both violent and property crime. And they saw a 23% decrease once they had the on-beat foot patrols. Also, the NCPCs I want to build out. Now, Charlotte can probably tell you at Watergate, they have a great active neighborhood watch, and they're consistently speaking with officers. However, that's not necessarily the case, especially here, we're in the newer developments. So making sure that we're maintaining that consistent communication with officers outside of when we're just calling them to report crimes is also one way I feel we can increase public safety and trust.
Thank you. Charlotte?
Yeah, I mean, I'm aware that some of the statistics are inflated because we have the afternoon population sort of expanding the number of people, but then it gets divided by our local sort of real residential population, and we get such a high number. But there definitely is a property crime increase happening. There's an overall sense of being unsafe in this city. Now that it has been growing. I mean, it is something that's happening across the country, of course, but it isn't something that we can just sort of look away from. I think that this needs to be addressed from a variety of perspectives. It is not only a police issue. It is working with the community and the police and businesses together. And a lot of this, though, a lot of the solutions can be targeted and looked at. Again, I'm going to say we need to look outside of Emeryville. We need to think outside of our box and look to regions and cities who have done innovative things that work. With auto thefts, for example, catalytic converter thefts have been the biggest thing lately, causing that to be an issue. There's a city nearby that actually has just partnered with local businesses to etch the catalytic converters with ID numbers. It prevents people from stealing them. They saw a drastic reduction in thefts from that. Some things are really simple. And the reason we aren't getting those solutions is because the city council isn't talking with the police department enough and isn't talking with the community enough. And in my talks with community, oh, okay, my time's up.
Thank you, Charlotte. For my next question, you will begin, and it's about retail space in Emeryville. So much of Emeryville is retail space. How will you balance the interests of companies and the residents of Emeryville?
Am I first? That's my turn now. Yeah. Retail space, I think a lot of things we've seen, of course, a lot of this gets blamed on COVID, the shuttered retail space, but that was actually a declining trend even prior to COVID. It just sort of accelerated it. I think that it is very important for us to support our small businesses and the diversity of that. We at the same time need to make sure that we are being realistic and forward focusing. What's happening with retail is not something that is new to anyone who has been involved in tech or innovation in any way. We've been, for example, with the work that I've been doing, we've been talking about the disruption that will be happening in the retail industry for the last decade. And COVID really, though, accelerated that process. We need to help our small businesses with real knowledge on how to do this, on how to pivot and make it work. We need to allow spaces to have micro businesses change the licensing in a way where we're allowing innovative things to work, innovative solutions. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you. Courtney?
You know, I definitely agree with us being innovative. Like I mentioned, I've worked in Emeryville, worked at both Best Buy and Pack and Save. And remember, you know, growing up, the redevelopment when Bay Street went up and how exciting it was to have all of that retail space just within a short distance, all the selections. We didn't have to go over to San Francisco anymore. We were able to go right over to Bay Street, and seeing how the entire region has shifted and businesses are leaving, and the challenge around getting businesses to come in. One piece, I think, you know, we have grants that are available to small business owners, and it's not promoted in such a way that I feel is effective. Why aren't we going out and promoting this to lots of people? We have lots of retail space. So we need obviously new people coming in Obviously, raising capital can be a challenge for many. So letting folks know, hey, we have access to funding for you available. Also removing some of the barriers, and I've mentioned this before, some of the retail locations were put up without plumbing and electricity. That's a challenge. That's a whole project within itself. So being aware of the certain barriers that cause this inequity, especially for smaller business owners, is a way we can help bring in and also keep folks here with us.
Thank you. I'd like to go into a topic that impacts much of the Bay Area and California housing policy. I know we've also mentioned this a bit already, but what do you see as the issues that face Emeryville around housing and homelessness? And what policies would you champion to address these issues? And Courtney, you're starting on this one.
Yes, you know, I mentioned earlier some of the priorities around affordable housing. A big piece, of course, about addressing homelessness is making sure that there is enough housing and that the housing that is available is housing that the residents and families can maintain. A previous role, I was the continuum of care specialist for Alameda County, which is a collaborative group of both city governments, Alameda County, and community-based organizations that work to address homelessness in our county. And previously, we noticed that the smaller cities like Emeryville, like Albany, just kind of got pushed out of the conversation, and it takes a lot of capacity to be involved. Some of the bigger cities have full-on, housing departments that are able to come and address these issues, and they've got managers and coordinators and all the such. So we're a little bit smaller. So just having that knowledge of how to plug Emeryville into the continuum of care so we can build out those partnerships that are so effective when we're thinking about how to not just have shelter, but also long-term funding to get things like shelter care plus housing, which is for folks who have chronic mental health issues or struggling with addiction, might have debilitating issues and need that type of funding to stay housed. Also, our shelter plus, our shelter family shelter that has been brought up, that was a partnership. Oh, I'm out of time.
Thank you, Courtney. Charlotte?
Yeah, well, first I'd like to clarify that when Courtney talks about her vast connections with this continuum of care spectrum, she only worked there for 11 months. It's I know lower level position, so it's not, the extent of the connections are a bit exaggerated to say the least. But what I would like to point out with regard to affordable housing is that our community has really stepped up on this issue. And I think that we as a community care a lot about it. What I think the community gets frustrated about is that we aren't seeing the results that we're kind of expecting from that. And one of the things is the goal of affordable housing is really to make sure that the people who work here can afford to live here, and that the people who live here aren't going to be displaced. And right now our policies don't necessarily do that. And I would like to see us align better with that. For example, the majority of the city's teachers, preschool staff, firefighters, police officers, city employees don't live in Emeryville, but we don't give any type of preference for them. And that's sort of the heart of community building, is that we need these key members of our community here in our community. We've seen that it reduces crime, increases performance in schools. We also have strange provisions like our BMR renter program that allows you to own residential real estate and still occupy, get a below market rental unit as long as that's your primary residence. Well, that's not who we're intended to serve.
Thank you, Charlotte. I want to remind the candidates to focus on their policies and their positions and avoid any personal attacks or comments. The next topic, Charlotte, you'll start with, the topic is policing. Okay. In the wake of the murder of George Floyd, there have been calls to defund the police. Where do you stand on this movement and why?
Well, obviously the term defund police isn't really what it sounds like it is. It's really meant to diversify responses and for example, to increase social service responses and things and have things addressed more appropriately by different people. Because right now we have the police having to deal with everything, including mental health issues and so forth. So in that sense, yes, I do agree with that we need to expand those services. In a small town like Emeryville, I don't think that we need to cut police services, which we are clearly very much in need of with our high property crime rates and so forth. We don't need to cut the police in order to increase community services. We do need more behavioral health support, which is mental health and addiction support, and outreach, and have a better connection with the county in order to make sure that we are addressing people correctly. And we also need increased education of police members as well. The police are already doing, Chief Jennings is doing a pretty good job of already doing education on unconscious bias, on de-escalation training, but clearly we need more of that. And anytime you talk about taking money away from the police department, usually, unfortunately, the training is something that gets cut first. I would like to see that money sort of earmarked or targeted specifically for increasing those types of training rather than having it reduced. Thank you.
Thank you. Courtney?
Yes, I have to agree. I believe and I understand that the desire around the phrase defund the police sometimes has a visceral reaction for certain people, but it really is about reallocating funds to address the roots of crime, especially violent crime that plague certain cities, many of which are rooted in poverty and lack of educational funding, lack of job opportunities. And so those that type of crime is just allowed to fester until it reaches over to a boiling point. So redirecting funds to addressing the roots of crime, of course, is very important, because we're not just addressing it as the crime has now already happened when you're calling in the police. We're now making our community safer by addressing some of the very deep-rooted issues. And of course, yes, in Emeryville, we're small. And the defund movement, I feel as if wouldn't necessarily apply here, because we do need our police, and they do need to be well funded, because we have a property crime issue, and police presence has shown to lower that issue. So as far as using that here, I don't see where it would necessarily apply.
You're on mute.
Thank you. Our league at both the local, state, and national level is committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and using that lens throughout our work. How would you suggest increasing diverse representation in city government and also civic engagement? Courtney, you're first.
Well, I think it comes down to outreach. As I mentioned in my opening statement, we don't have any Black residents currently. Our last Black resident was on the City Council in 2005. The last Black woman was in 1987. So I think it really comes down to intention and being strategic when you are looking for building the pipeline of leaders, and looking to different communities outside of the ones that have been historically represented for quite some time, and actually going out and reaching out to communities and bringing them in and being involved with them. Because if folks aren't aware of who is their representatives, who are their leaders, it's less likely that they would be even interested in possibly not just pursuing public office, but being involved on boards and commissions, or just serving in any capacity on maybe a nonprofit board. So when it comes to diversity, you have to be specifically and intentional when it comes to recruitment, because like I said, the same old people will get elected, the same old people will be on boards and commissions, the same old people will be running the nonprofit boards as well, unless people lead with intention and look for equitable ways to include underrepresented communities.
Thank you. Charlotte?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I have led civic engagement, voter forums, registration drives, voter education forums for over a decade with the Asian Pacific Islander American Public Affairs Association, or APAPA, as some of you may know, the organization. And what I've learned from that experience is that we keep waiting as a city here. When I look at Emeryville, we wait as a city for the people to come to us. And I've been doing what I learned through that organizing in my campaign. I have actually already been reaching out, not to the key voters only. I have reached out to immigrants who don't normally vote. I've reached out to all of the sort of marginalized groups that I can. And so many people have said, oh my goodness, nobody has ever reached out or talked to me before. I have done things in an unorthodox way for that very purpose. And that's exactly what the city needs to do. On top of that, we need to have an actual diversity council. I'm part of the Alameda County Human Relations Commission. And basically that's a matter of it's a diversity council. That's something that we can have the same type of model here in the city, where we are looking at different groups of people in this city. We're making sure that there are people on that that are representative of different groups in our region, and they are holding us accountable. They're making suggestions. They're doing the outreach. They're telling us how to do it. Thank you.
Thank you both. This was also mentioned earlier, but I'd like to hear more about the active transit plan. So over the summer, the city initially elicited input on the active transit plan. And in your view, what should the plan include, especially around sustainable transportation? And this is started by Charlotte.
Oh, sorry, I get confused who's going first. Sustainability is an important part. We should be doing as much as we can to electrify everything with regard to transit. We need to do a better job of connecting things like our bike facilities to the public transit, because there's this idea that once you get to one spot that there's nothing, you still have a ways to go. Everything doesn't go to exactly where it's at. We need community input. I think the problem with most plans is that when we're talking about them, they're taking too long. We can get input faster, we can get results faster, we can get things to happen. There are a lot, and I guess that some of that is the frustration of how slowly government moves, but I don't think it needs to be that slow, and I think we can get more input happening. We need to look at really focusing as well on our small businesses and making sure that our transit plan works for the businesses. We want to make sure that we're directing traffic to where our businesses need it to go. There are certain spots where we can't get to certain locations without a vehicle, and yet there's no parking when we get there. That's a frustrating thing for people. We decide that, okay, well, I'm not going to go there because I can't park when I get there, and there's no Emery-go-round doesn't go there. So we need to actually do this a little bit more intentionally and listen to our committees that work on things. I know BPAC, for example, has done a lot of great initiatives and work that just, it's not being adopted by the city council.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Thank you.
Courtney?
Yes, I think one of the really big challenges is around connections, and it's also around safety. If you look over the current active transportation plan, you see how many people, whether they're a pedestrian or a cyclist, report not feeling safe, or this isn't safe, the sidewalks are not wide enough. And I know personally, when I walk with my children down Shell Mound, the sidewalks do get very thin, and that doesn't make me feel comfortable as a mother who wants to walk, who wants to encourage my children to walk, to you know, pursue being a pedestrian. It feels very unsafe. So if we want to make sure that people are encouraged, especially folks who might be a little hesitant around getting out of their cars and becoming a pedestrian primarily, or becoming a more active cyclist, we have to think about how are we improving those safety measures, especially in the Bay Area here. You know, there are too many people are pedestrians and cyclists get hit far too often, and it's disproportionately people of color. So that's one major issue I want to be addressed. Just as a parent and as a resident of the city, I want people to feel safe and feel encouraged. Also, of course, making sure that the connectivity does work, and that people can get to where they're going and they're not ending up in no man's land. It's because, again, that's discouraging when it comes to using the type of alternative transit. Thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. And a question, this one is about vote 16. In the city of Berkeley, the voting age for school board was lowered to 16, although they have yet to implement that plan. What is your position on lowering the voting age to 16, whether for school board or city council, et cetera? And Courtney, you begin with this one.
Well, I support it. I support it on two ends. One, obviously the school board makes decisions for the school. The children attending schools should be able to participate, and who essentially are their representatives and folks depending who are deciding on their budget and initiatives in the school district. Also, I think it's a way for us to encourage voter participation earlier. A lot of times folks, the first time you vote might be when you're 18. For me, I didn't get to vote until 2006 in a primary. So I turned 18 in 2005 and had to wait a whole other year. So I think it will actually encourage our young people who have historically lower voter turnout to get more engaged and more involved, and give them more substantial voter education earlier in their life than thinking about this is just something that adults do. And of course, as we know, some adults are very old and do not vote at all and don't get engaged in the voting process. So I support lowering the age.
Thank you. Charlotte?
Absolutely, same thing. I gotta say that I think we underestimate our youth quite a bit, and we can just look to the survivors of the Parkland shooting and the mass organizing they did as high school students, and how strongly they spoke out and were active participants in the in the government civic process, even though they didn't have a right to vote. And they do have a right to vote, especially on things surrounding their schools. You can also look at how active young people in particular have been about climate change and the lead that they're taking. Greta Thunberg, for example, who's from Sweden like I am, is a world leader and has spoken in front of the UN and every substantial leader ever about what we need to do about climate change, and people are taking her seriously. And I think there are a lot of issues that our youth are very much capable of speaking on, from the environment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as issues regarding schools and equity within schools that they have a right to speak on, and would be an informed citizenry, and actually can teach some of us older people more. Thank you.
Thank you both. Now, Emeryville also has a history of protests by Native Americans who protest the use of Shell Mound Street as a residential shopping area. Do you all have opinions or thoughts on this topic in particular, and what do you think should be done, if anything? I'm going to start with Charlotte.
Yeah, Indigenous people in the country have clearly been mistreated, as we know, and we do little things like give a little, ceremonial acknowledgement every once in a while has been the latest trend. But I think that we can do more as a city to recognize the deep roots that they have here, that they were displaced from this land, the Ohlone tribe, and also to really do what we can to integrate them more into this society, and say that now Emeryville is going to be a place where we respect our history. And that is something that needs to happen on all levels. Native Americans is one. The Chinese Americans were here from the 1800s on. No acknowledgement of that history ever as well. And of course, Black Americans have been here as well. We need to do an overall revamp and look at how we are treating our early history, and make sure that history is acknowledged, appreciated, and taught. Thank you.
Thank you. Courtney?
Yeah, I have to agree. The violence that has been impacted and just exercised against Indigenous people for centuries is painful. And Emeryville is a place where we didn't do our best, I feel, to protect and preserve and honor some of the protests and listen to some of the protests that were being displayed during that time. Yeah, we can do better. We can include, and again, this goes back to the diversity and inclusion, reaching out to underrepresented communities and including them in the conversations. They were, from what I recall at that time, and I was young, their concerns were really ignored until the ongoing protest had been started and until the media had caught wind. But it shouldn't have taken media pressure to pay attention to residents expressing that this is a sacred land and understanding what that means for them, for their tribe. So I just feel as if we could have done a lot better with including them into the conversation outside of, adhering to media pressure, and make a moving forward, making sure that doesn't happen again.
Thank you, Courtney. And for my final question, our final question this evening, how do you plan to work with other council members on your political priorities in Emeryville? And we're going to start with Courtney.
I always have a statement that I say, and it's, if you lead with love, you'll never get lost. And what I mean by that, even in the professional sense, is I think coming to the table with just the understanding and the humility that we're all trying our best. And there might be some policy gaps. Folks might not always agree, but just understanding that all of us want the best for Emeryville. And we're all coming from different backgrounds and have different understandings and different point of views, but always keeping focused on the goal of making Emeryville the best place it can be, I think is one moving forward, if elected, how I would lead with working with the fellow city council members. I know them, I've met with them all. I respect their work, they respect mine. We have a positive, casual relationship right now. But yeah, I always believe in just leading with respect and humility and making sure that you're focused on the goal of what you're working on. And that's how I would work with them on the priorities.
Thank you. Charlotte?
Yeah, well, I mean, I have a 20-year history of working collaboratively with on boards, on regional matters, on international issues, big events, small events, at all different levels, both tech innovation and government related things. And collaboration is what I do. And I really can work with anyone, anywhere. Everyone brings a different set of strengths to the table. I think it's important to acknowledge those and come from that position. When you're dealing, though, as well in a public office position, it is important to work well with your co-council members, but it is still even more important to make sure that you are upholding your fiduciary duties to the public, and that you are making sure that you and your colleagues are held to the highest account, because it is an honor and what I think of as very sacred duty to represent people. I'm on the council, if elected, I'm on there to represent you, the citizens of Emeryville, not to advance my own agenda, not to boost my career, anyone else's career. I'm there to represent. And that is something that we all need to be goal-oriented and focused on, representing the people of Emeryville.
Thank you. Now, before the candidates give their closing statements, I have a few remarks on behalf of the LWVBAE. First of all, thank you so much to the candidates for running for office and for your participation in the event this evening. I also want to thank the audience for engaging in our democracy, both by attending this evening and also submitting your questions. For further information about upcoming events, about the candidates, please visit the LWVBAE website. It's lwvbae.org. You can also read more about the candidates at votersedge.org/CA. We invite you to join the League to help us engage voters and defend democracy. We do so much more than voter registration and education, and we are especially trying to reach out to Emeryville citizens, and Emeryville residents, I should say. Visit our website and social media accounts at LWVBAE. The deadline to vote this year is November 2nd, because this is a special election, so there will be only one race that you're voting on. And now the candidates will make closing statements. We will reverse the order that we began with. Each candidate will have a closing statement of 2 minutes, and we will start with Courtney.
Yes, as I said in my opening statement, this is an opportunity to enhance the strength of Emeryville through representation and professional background. Although important, no amount of education, training, seminars, conferences can substitute for having individuals who come from underrepresented communities and have them be a part of leadership, and also having people who have lived through the experiences that we are trying to solve in our city. I have the relationships built with local leaders, community-based organizations, and the governance experience to fill this role seamlessly. And I want to keep Emeryville strong. We are succeeding, and help us grow where we need improvement. Thank you.
Thank you. Charlotte?
Sorry, hang on. Sorry, 1 minute. Okay, so, well, I absolutely love this city. I've lived here for 6 years. And I believe, like so many of you do, that we can just be so much more than what we are. We can have transparent government with better communication and engagement and accountability to our residents. We can have a vibrant and a diverse economy full of innovation, entrepreneurship, small businesses and micro businesses, more art, more culture, and super cool architecture, no big giant awning buildings. We can be a model for the state on addressing climate change. We can create more spaces for people to connect, more parks, green spaces, dog parks, bike, walking trails, and gathering spaces. And we can make this city safe from one end to the other, and we can keep it clean. We can create collaborations that lift up our public schools and create award-winning STEAM programs. We can have vibrant community building programs that are multi-generational and that especially value and utilize the knowledge base of our seniors. We can create more effective housing and homeless programs and make our city teachers, preschool staff, firefighters, police officers, and city employees, we can make this so that they can actually live here. There really is, in my opinion, based on the people that I've met in this city, the sky's the limit. Our dreams are the limit. We need to work together, and we can make Emeryville be even more than what we right now can envision. This is an amazing place to live, and I would very much appreciate your support. You can read more about me if you haven't already at charlotteforemeryville.com. Thank you.
Thank you both again for joining us this evening. If you all can join me in a virtual round of applause. I know we're still in such difficult times, and I appreciate you all taking the time to join us. Again, this recording will be both on our website, on our YouTube channel, and also on our social media. We wish you all well. Have a good night. Thank you.